Hey there, I'm back to work a little bit more on this landscape painting, developing the water a little bit further. Last time we added a second layer of glazes in the water. We used some raw sienna, some raw umber, a little bit of sap green in there, and today we'll develop the water a little bit further and then add a little bit more in the rocks. Here's the reference picture. Beautiful Appalachian landscape. And we won't get the little trickle down waterfalls until we get another layer on and that layer gets dry. I'm going to start out with a number 4 round brush, and I'm just going to have a little fun developing some detail in the rocks. There's some lichen growing on this rock, and I'm going to use a scumbling technique where I just put a little bit of paint on the brush and just kind of scrape it across the surface in order to get that lichen texture. I don't want the white to be too bright. I do want to have some contrast because this rock is kind of a focal point, but I don't want it to be so bright that it doesn't look natural. So just having a little bit of fun with texture on that rock. We'll develop a few details in the background elements and then get into the glaze in the water. A little bit more highlighting on these trees and a few little details that we maybe didn't get last time in the rocks, building up that texture. I can see that this rock needs to kind of blend in a little bit more to the background. So I'll take care of that with a glaze. I'm going to use a liquid medium, and I'm going to use a raw umber, which is a fairly transparent color. I'm also, because that part of the painting has a little bit of a reddish cast, I'm going to use a little tad of burnt sienna just to give it that red fall leaf cast. This is a great landscape for this time of year. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I'm using quite a bit of liquid medium to make my paint transparent, and so then I'm just gonna glaze a layer over that rock, and that's gonna just really push it back into the background and let some of these lighter rocks in the foreground stand out a little bit more. And this is a very, very transparent layer. And I've made it transparent by adding liquid medium. I'm going to mix a little more of that. It was raw sienna, or raw umber and burnt sienna. And I'm also going to push this little part of the landscape back by just darkening it a little bit so that it is in contrast to the rocks that are closer to us. I'm going to use this glaze layer too in shaping some of these rocks in the foreground and just adding a little bit more dimension to them. More of my burnt sienna here to add a little detail and shape to that rock. I'm going to have lots of leaves here on the creek bank, so I may start to build in just a little bit of that texture. And it'll take several layers to get that where I want it to be. When I have a color on my brush, I like to hop around and find that color in other places in my painting. I think it saves a little time in the long run. I see Shane. Somebody said, hello, Miss Dunn. Is that Maggie? I'm not sure. I think that's Maggie. Hey, Maggie. And then somebody named Mouse. Hey there. This is something I'm hoping to do every Wednesday about 1 o'clock. So if you have a project going and you have a question, or if you'd like to see something demonstrated, I would love it if you would let me know the direction you would like for me to take. That would help me to plan. I'm sure that's Maggie. And if it is, Maggie is the most talented singer. She's amazing. So if you're not following MibMab, check her out. Okay, now I'm gonna come into the water a little bit. That's sort of the focus today. Let me grab this little face of the rock here. Maggie's also an extremely talented artist. She was one of my students when I was teaching high school, and I have very fond memories. We had so much fun. Okay, now I'm going to develop some rocks in the water and then add another glaze layer to the water. So I see some rocks back here in the background that stick up over the surface of the water, and I'm going to use titanium white, a little bit of burnt sienna, and some yellow ochre to mix the color for those rocks. And this is an opaque color. I've made it opaque by adding titanium white so that it's not see-through. Didn't get it quite light enough, so I'm going to go back and pick up a little more of that titanium white, and now just highlighting that rock. And because it's in the distance, I'm not gonna make it have real sharp edges, because when things are further in the distance, they're usually darker, or they're usually they have a softer edges is what I'm trying to spit out. Softer edges in the distance. When I come down here to the foreground, then I'll make sure that my edges are crisp and I have more details. There's a little leaf that hangs down here. And then this rock is going to be very important. So this is already light enough. I'm going to switch brushes. I'm going to pick up this is a number 2 flat brush, and I'm going to darken some of the water that runs across this rock. And the colors I'm using here are raw umber, lots of raw umber in this painting, and raw sienna. I'm going to use raw umber and raw sienna. Both of these are very transparent, and in order for the water to appear transparent, see-through, clear, I'm going to layer these glazes, these transparent layers. Last time we added a color that was like wet sand under the surface. So this time we're developing that a little bit further. The layer we did last Wednesday is already dry. Now I'm going to go really, really dark down here because this water is just flowing across this rock, and I'm going to go into a really dark color because the light is all hidden down here. No light can get to this area. Now there's going to be a pretty little waterfall that comes down through here. It's going to fall here and it's going to fall here. And I want to have plenty of contrast so that my waterfall really stands out. So I want to make sure that I develop these darks on either side of the waterfall as much as I possibly can. And I won't put the waterfall in until next week because this layer is going to need to dry before I put in that waterfall layer. When I do get to the waterfall layer, that's going to be done with lots of liquid medium, so a very transparent color, and it'll be done with some titanium white and just a little bit of blue, because that the reflections on the water pick up just a little bit of the sky, and so they have a little bit of a blue cast. So I'm really developing the shadows today because I want nice contrast when I do put in the waterfalls. I see Dawn came on. Hey Dawn. And Kendra's on. Kendra's been doing some amazing work. Did I miss anybody? I'm very new. Oh, and Megan. Hey Megan. I'm very new at Instagram Live, so you got to look over me. I hope everybody's having a good week. Hope school's going good. I know Megan had a tough week in school this week. I hope the tests are going good if you've got some of them over with. Maggie, I would love to get an update if you're still listening. I haven't heard from you in so long, and I'd love to hear an update about what's going on with you. I know you've had a tough go of it, and I've thought about you a lot. Okay, so keep on developing these shadows using lots and lots of raw umber here. Almost thinking black and white. And now here in the where the shadow just sort of dissipates, I want it to be very soft. So what I'm doing is I'm getting enough paint off the brush that you know, just kind of working it enough that my brush is almost dry. And then into that edge, I'm just kind of moving that paint around and just really spreading it out thin. That's called scumbling, when you just kind of spread the paint as thin as you can. Now it's not as smooth as I'd like for it to be. So what I'm going to do is come in with a dry brush. I'm going to choose a dry brush that's fairly soft, and I'm just going to go over it with that dry brush and spread that paint out some more. Okay, now I want to also pick up a few more of the leaves that are under the surface of the water. Don't want to be too detailed because you can't really see through the water and see the leaves very clearly, but I do want to show that there are leaves under the water. Show enough detail that it stays interesting. And this is going to need to dry before my final glaze layer, but I'll be able to develop the water quite a bit today. Okay, now I'm going to pick up some raw sienna, a little bit of liquid, but I don't need much liquid because raw sienna is a very transparent color. Okay, so raw sienna, and like I mentioned last time, the raw sienna is very close to the color of wet sand. So I want it to look like there's wet sand under the surface of my water. And then I want to add just a little bit of sap green because the sap green is going to mimic the algae that grows in the water, and then the colors will sort of just kind of blend together on there because the glazes are transparent, and So the effect is just like transparent water. This is a very subtle layer. I'm going to add just a little bit of the raw umber because it's not quite dark enough yet. So a little bit of raw umber, especially up here where the light doesn't get so much. I guess the water's a little deeper in here. So that little bit of raw umber is going to deepen that color. And then I want to develop a little bit more shadow down here under this rock. Using my dry brush to spread some of that color out. And a little bit more of the raw sienna or raw umber over here. And then I just really want to smooth that edge. Now I'm going to add some more of the raw sienna. I'm using a very, very limited palette. I'm a big fan of a limited palette because the limited palette allows you to really get used to the colors that you're using and really get good at knowing what they're capable of and how transparent they are, how they mix with other colors. There can be some subtleties that take a little time to get used to. Okay, so back up here I'm adding a little sap green this time because under this rock at the top of this tiny little waterfall there's some moss, a little bit of moss growing under there. So I'm adding my sap green to my raw umber to give it that mossy color. Okay, and now I'm going to pick up some of my burnt sienna again. I think I've only used 4 or 5 colors in this whole painting. The burnt sienna is going to come in up here where the leaves have fallen into the water and gotten wet and started to decompose a little bit. So burnt sienna is going to give it that reddish cast. I'm going to add some yellow ochre and a little bit of titanium white to pick up some of these leaves over here. I want to add a few more rocks before I finish for the day. Just a few more rocks back here so that next week I'm ready to finish up the water with my little waterfalls, and then I'll add this creek bank and the painting will be finished except for final touches. I've had a lot of fun with this painting. It makes me feel like fall, makes me feel like being outside and getting rid of all that stress. That's a goal I've had this year, is spending more time outside. I don't know if there's any substitute for time outside in the woods. And we live in such a beautiful place. It's easy to take for granted. But right now the leaves are in peak and it is absolutely beautiful out there. Okay, so I think I'm going to call it finished for today, and I'll do this again next week and work on the little waterfalls here, build in some of the creek bank, and get, I think, 2 more sessions and this painting will be finished. So if you have an idea about what I should do next, something you'd like to see, then please let me know, and I'll be glad to work it in. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next Wednesday.